This is my absolute favorite piece of stupidity. People who use animals to study human pain as models turn around and deny that animals feel pain. You don't believe me? 1982, I was at the University of London. They asked me to refute a Dr. Igo, who was a pain physiologist. He got up and for an hour and 10 minutes talked about how the electrochemical activity in the cerebral cortex of the dog was different from that of people, and therefore the dog didn't really feel pain in any way we could identify with. And they said, you got 15 minutes to refute him. I said, I only need 2. Dr. Igo, if I'm not mistaken, you do pain research. Yes. I said, if I'm not mistaken, you do it on dogs, right? Yes. If I'm not mistaken, you extrapolate the results to people, right? He said, of course, that's why I do it. I said, good, either your speech is false or your life's work is. Dumb shit. I know, I shouldn't say stuff like that, you know. It's not PC. You guys aren't PC. Don't tell me the Animal Science Department in North Dakota State is politically correct. If you are, I'm going to go home and shoot myself because there's no hope. So there's bad anthropomorphism and there's good anthropomorphism. And I know exactly what you're talking about, the morons in New York City who put themselves in a confinement situation and say, how would you? But there's a legitimate component to that too. I mean, how would you like to be locked in a room where you couldn't run, you couldn't walk, et cetera, et cetera? That's one of the reasons that life in prison is such an excruciating payment. I mean, I'm a capital punishment guy. I'd like to see every one of those child murderers shot, and I would pull the trigger myself, to be honest with you. And by the way, I say this at CSU, which makes me a fascist and blah, 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 you know, whatever. But in truth, they do not stay. They let them exercise an hour a day, blah, 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 blah. What about an animal? I mean, how many of you guys would live the life of a sow in confinement? The equivalent. You wouldn't, you know? And your gut tells you it's not something you should do to an animal. Not something you should do to a conscious thing. And I've said, look, if you really want to have these systems and there's no alternative to them, make the animals decerebrate. So that they're just, you know, they're not conscious at all. And then you raise them as meat rather than as living things. But as long as they're living things. Temple Grandin, you know, there's a lot of bullshit you hear in animal science that the landrace pig has been developed for confinement. Well, Temple, when she was at Illinois, took a landrace pig, 50th generation, and turned it loose outside the facility. And what do you think happened? Did it fight to get back? There was a mud wallow. What did it do? Bingo. You know? I don't know how somebody could claim inheritance of acquired characteristics. Yeah.
I had a question on the sows, and you talked about, obviously, the idea of removing crates and getting into a group housing system. But from the public perspective, where does the final line get drawn? From going from gestation stalls to group housing, you've talked about the idea of having a mile pasture to roam on, to them acquiring their own food. I mean, where does that line become, we've today reached the needs of the public? Where's tomorrow's needs? Where's the next day's needs? And where do we get to the point where it becomes a point of physically impossible producing food?
Neither you nor I knows that point. You know, it's a point that evolves. And hopefully part of the evolutionary equation is your input. That's why these people have done the exact opposite of what they should do. They don't engage the public. They don't talk, in the end, to their consumers, you know, which is the bold move that Smithfield decided to engage in. I think if you are genuinely willing to explain to people, there's a limit on accommodating the animal's nature, you know. We've done this with zoos. But on the other hand, sir, and it's a good question, there's a middle ground between zoos when I was growing up and wild animal parks. You know, when I got to Colorado, and I'm not kidding, in 1969, there was an enclosure at the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo for a giraffe that the giraffe could not stand up in. And I'll bet you there isn't one of you in this room that would defend that. You see? So, yeah, and your point is well taken. It's a moving target, right?
Yeah.
The question is, do you let it move or do you participate in how it moves? And really, American agriculture has been deficient in engaging in dialogue with the public.
And is some of that because the ability to engage is very pricey compared to the competitors that are pushing some of these tactics?
You know, you hear a lot of that, you know, Wayne Pacelli has, like he's been demonized by everybody. You know, Wayne Pacelli has a lot of money. Wayne Pacelli has a $160 million annual budget, from what I read. Okay? What do you think Cargill's annual budget is? You know? You guys have much more money than they do. Pacelli is not the devil, which is actually what some of the cowboys call him in Colorado. He's the devil. He's not the devil. He's just smart. And he knows what things the general public are going to support. You know what I mean? That's why he doesn't do a referendum to abolish meat. You know what I mean? The minute he did anything like that, he will admit, I'm a vegan. I'm not trying to make you a vegan. I'd like you to be a vegan, but I'm certainly not going to use the legislative process for that. You see? As I told a couple of you guys at breakfast, the only person who ever said that to me was Emmylou Harris. She said, you shouldn't try to fix agriculture, you should just make a law abolishing meat. Proving that you can be a great singer, a great songwriter, a beautiful woman, and have no brains. Whatever. Right? So, I mean, everything you say is right, but it's not an excuse not to try. And, I mean, do you think that the Smithfield Corporation is demonized by the public? Only if they make themselves demonized. You know what I mean? If they go out there and do commercials saying, for example, this is a commercial I would do for Smithfield if they hired me. I'd say, we have raised pigs like this for 60 years, 40 years, whatever it is. And we just found out that you guys don't like it. Okay? So here are some of the options that would still keep food affordable. Let us know what you think. You think that would backfire? I don't think it would backfire. It's amazing, but American business tends to avoid the truth. And I've always felt that I do a lot of damage control on animal welfare things at CSU. You tell people the truth. They buy it. They all have bullshit detectors, you know? And if you try to bullshit people, well, actually, the sows prefer it. You know, they're really crazy about being in the little crate, you know? Don't do it. You know what I mean? First of all, you're a PhD student, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to be out there. You're going to be talking to people. Be talking to kids. Tell them the truth. Tell them why crates started. Not some fiendish sadist, you know, but price of land, ease of checking health and stuff like that. And this is where it failed, and this is why we're trying to get out of it. You see? You won't be condemned for that. If Nixon had told the truth, he would have stayed president, instead of requiring that his secretary was an octopus with 8 legs who accidentally erased the tapes, you know?
16 times.
16 times, that's right. Yeah. Seriously, that's what you do. You tell the truth. When I got multiple surgery at CSU stopped, I asked the dean for permission to publicize what happened. He said, yeah, go for it. And I said, you know, for years and years and years we did this out of economic convenience. It has dawned on some of us that it's outrageous and that we as veterinarians should be the last people doing that. And so we're giving it up. What did people remember? CSU gave it up. Not CSU did it for 30 years and then gave it up. CSU gave it up. Does that make sense? It's hard. I mean, look, I'm as open to this as you are. It's hard when you people have busted your humps for years and years and years to try to create cheap and plentiful food, because that's what society wanted. But society is perfectly empowered to say, oh, we forgot something. We worry about animal welfare. We worry about the environment, you know?
I perhaps have a written question about pain.
Please.
Sometimes I think analgesia has went too far. And pain is a good thing that we actually, as clinicians, look for in trying to diagnose some problem.
Sure.
And so, I mean, where is the balance there for, you know, where I would do surgery on an animal and put a hole in its side.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, but I want to know that that animal's in pain and not healing versus just giving it analgesia no matter what.
You're a vet?
Well, I do surgery on
Oh, okay.
that.
You know Bernie Hansen? Bernie Hansen is a very interesting guy at North Carolina State. He's an emergency guy. And actually in the late 70s, he heard me speak and it changed his whole life. He turned it into concern for animal pain. And he says, no animal should have to really suffer after a veterinary procedure, you know? And that gives you some wiggle room, you know what I mean? You don't want to render the animal insensible, you see?
Mhm.
At every time you cut a nail or anything like that. But, I mean, I'm thinking, and you've seen it too, I think because you're old enough, I've seen animals screaming after a thoracotomy, dogs. Haven't you?
Yeah, thankfully not, but keep going.
There was no reason for that, you know? I got the most incredible bullshit from vets who are my friends that, well, the animal actually much prefers to be able to scream rather than to be dulled by analgesia. Well, I mean, that's why it's an art, giving analgesia, you know? You take the edge off. I mean, have you had major injuries yourself?
Not major.
Well,
No.
Bernie, in the old
Yeah.
days, when I graduated from vet school in '85,
Right.
and I remember the pharmacology stuff, and one of the mantras at the time was, actually, we don't want to give analgesias because if the animal's in pain, we want to know if there's something wrong with the incision line
Right.
or something like that, which is, thankfully, we've moved away from that.
There you go. I mean, the point is, you can leave enough to know that
Because if you got a problem,
it shows.
the analgesia probably isn't going to really cover
Right.
it up.
Now, you know, like I say, rocking the animal out with analgesia certainly would cover it up, but nobody sane does that, you know? But these people were actually arguing that the pain is salubrious. Now, there's probably, for every paper that says that, there's 1,000 papers saying that if you control the pain, you have quicker healing and less infection. So once again, it's going to be a judgment.
Yeah, but you have to also, Bernie, since you're on the ethics of it, those studies are also paid by the companies that make the analgesics.
Sure, well, I mean, yeah, but you know, if we get skeptical on that level, we gotta throw all the science out. Because all of science is paid for by vested interests. You know? You gotta look at the quality of a protocol regardless of who paid for it. I think. Otherwise, you could all pack up and not do any more experimentation. And I'm sure you would resent it, you know, if a Pfizer study was questioned by some activists because it was Pfizer. And that's the only reason. You know? And look, there's a guy in animal science at CSU, Sean Archibek, some of you may know him. Sean talks about how one of the drug companies hired him to look at a feed additive. You probably know the story. Not only did his findings contradict their claim that it increased productivity, his findings showed that it decreased it majorly. So he wanted to publish it, because that was part of his deal. And they tried to bribe him, and then threaten him not to publish it. And he comes in and does a whole hour and a half talking to the students about the pressures on him. I mean, in the end, he did the right thing. So those things are out there. But, you know, Thomas Reed once said, veracity is a presupposition of discourse. I mean, every one of us may be lying all the time. But if that were indeed the case, and we believed it to be the case, we wouldn't speak. That make sense?
Yeah.
So, I guess, you know, we have our caring use committee here, like as they do in other universities. What do you propose is the next step in that process? You know, making, you know, as us as graduate students doing our research, so we make sure the animal is comfortable and we're not, you know, what do you propose the next step is?
Okay, well, I wrote the rationale for those laws, indeed. What I would have added, which might piss you guys off, but let me, you're already pissed off, right? So that's